6 years, I whispered to my reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to summon enthusiasm for tonight's anniversary dinner. My fingers trembled slightly as I fastened my mother's pearl earrings, the ones I only wore for special occasions. The woman staring back at me looked put together, hair carefully styled, makeup subtle but flattering, wearing the navy dress Daniel had once said brought out my eyes. But her smile didn't reach those eyes, which held a wariness I couldn't quite disguise. I hadn't always looked at my reflection with such uncertainty. When Daniel and I first met at my college roommate's graduation party, the chemistry had been immediate and intoxicating. He had this way of making me feel like the only person in a crowded room, leaning in close when I spoke as if my words were precious gems he couldn't bear to miss. Our courtship had been a whirlwind. Weekend road trips to small coastal towns, surprise picnics in the park, notes left in my textbooks during final exams. I'd never felt so seen, so cherished. Kate. Daniel's voice echoed from downstairs, jolting me from my reminiscing. We should leave in 15 if we want to make our reservation. His tone was neutral, efficient, the same voice he might use to remind me to pick up dry cleaning or pay the electric bill. When had that happened? When had his voice lost the warmth that once made my name sound like a love song? Coming, I called back, applying a final swipe of lipstick. The reservation was at Aldwell's, a mid-range restaurant downtown where we'd had our second date. Not the fanciest place in town, but it held sentimental value. At least it had for me. The drive to the restaurant was quiet, save for the soft jazz playing on the car stereo. Daniel focused on the road, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his leg. I remembered how, in our early days, that free hand would have sought mine, our fingers intertwining naturally across the console. Now the 6 inches between us might as well have been 6 miles. Your hair looks nice, he said suddenly, glancing over at a red light. Thank you, I replied, touching it self-consciously. I went to that new salon on Maple yesterday. Oh. The light turned green and his attention returned to the road. You didn't mention that. Because you didn't ask about my day, I thought, but didn't say. Because when I came home, you were on your phone, nodding absently at whatever I said before changing the subject to the problem with your work presentation. We used to talk for hours, Daniel and I. After our third date, we'd stayed at a 24-hour diner until sunrise, talking about everything from childhood memories to dream vacations to whether aliens might exist. Now our conversations revolved around grocery lists, bill payments, and updates about people we knew. When had we stopped sharing the deeper stuff? Our fears, our dreams, the thoughts that kept us awake at night. I gazed out the window at passing streetlights, remembering how I'd spent hours preparing for tonight. I'd bought a new dress, had my hair done, even prepared an anniversary card with a heartfelt message inside. The card was in my purse now, alongside a small wrapped box containing the vintage watch I'd tracked down because it resembled one his grandfather had owned. I'd been so proud of finding it, imagining the surprised delight on his face when he opened it. 3 weeks ago I'd asked Daniel what he wanted to do for our anniversary. Whatever you want is fine, he'd said, not looking up from his laptop. Maybe dinner somewhere? I'd suggested Aldwell's and he'd nodded without enthusiasm. Sure, that works. I'd pushed down my disappointment then, telling myself he was just busy with the Peterson account at work. Men weren't always good at celebrations, my mother had often said. I shouldn't read too much into it. So I'd made the reservation myself, dropping hints about how I'd booked our spot, and how I was looking forward to reminiscing about our early days. Daniel had smiled and nodded, but something in his eyes had seemed distant, almost evasive. As we pulled into the restaurant parking lot, I pushed these thoughts aside. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe tonight would be the reset our relationship needed. A reminder of why we'd fallen in love, a chance to reconnect. Remember when you spilled red wine all over yourself on our second date here? I asked, attempting lightness as Daniel found a parking space. He paused, key in the ignition. That wasn't here. That was at Giovanni's when we went with Mark and Jen. No, it was definitely here, I insisted. You were telling that story about your college road trip, gesturing with your glass, and it went all over your white shirt. The waitress brought you club soda, and you wore my scarf draped across your chest for the rest of the night. Daniel frowned, then shrugged. If you say so. The memory, once shared, now felt solely mine, a small but telling sign of how we'd drifted into separate realities. I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. Not now, I told myself. Don't ruin the evening before it even begins. Inside, Aldwell's hadn't changed much in 6 years. The same warm lighting, exposed brick walls, and black and white photos of the city from decades past. The host recognized me from when I'd come in to confirm the reservation earlier that week. "Mrs. Cooper, good evening. Your table is ready right this way." Daniel raised an eyebrow at me. "You came in earlier?" "Just to make sure everything was perfect," I said quietly, following the host. As we settled into our corner table, the same one from that second date which I'd specifically requested, I tried to recapture the magic of that night. We'd been so engrossed in each other then, the rest of the restaurant fading into background noise as we leaned closer, laughing, sharing appetizers with forks crossing midair. Our server brought menus and recited the evening's specials. Daniel ordered a scotch on the rocks. I chose a glass of Cabernet. "You look nice tonight," he said after the server left, his eyes meeting mine briefly before returning to the menu. "Thank you," I replied, warmth spreading through me at the small compliment. "It's new. I thought, special occasion, special dress." He nodded but didn't elaborate. I waited for him to mention his own preparations for our anniversary. Perhaps he had a card too, or a small gift waiting for the right moment. But he simply continued studying the menu as if it contained life-changing information. "The scallops look good," he finally said. "You always get the scallops," I pointed out, trying to keep my tone light. "They're reliable." He closed the menu. "You know what you want?" 6 years ago he would have said something playful like, "Besides you," with that crooked smile that made my heart race. Tonight he just waited for my food order with the patience of someone at a deli counter. When our drinks arrived, I raised my glass. "Happy anniversary, Daniel." 6 years. He clinked his glass against mine, but his "happy anniversary" lacked enthusiasm. I took a large sip of wine, needing the liquid courage. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" I asked. "During your vows?" Daniel shifted in his seat. "It was a while ago, Kate. You said that finding me was like finding a piece of yourself you never knew was missing." I continued, the words etched in my memory. "And that every day with me made the world brighter, more vivid." His gaze dropped to his drink. "I meant it at the time." At the time. 3 small words that crashed into me like a physical blow. I set my wine glass down carefully, afraid my shaking hand would spill it. "And now?" I managed to ask. Daniel looked around the restaurant, then back at me. "Maybe we should order first. Talk about this later." "No," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "I think we should talk about it now." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Kate, come on. It's our anniversary dinner." "Exactly. It's our anniversary. A celebration of our marriage. A marriage you just implied you no longer feel the same way about." The server approached, notepad ready, but sensing the tension, discreetly backed away. "I didn't say that," Daniel said, voice low. "What did you mean then?" He took a long drink of his scotch. "I just meant, people change. Feelings evolve. It doesn't mean I don't care about you. Care, not love." The distinction hung in the air between us. I thought about the signs I'd been ignoring for months. The way Daniel stayed late at work more often. How he'd started going to the gym every Saturday morning, despite hating exercise throughout our relationship, always showering there before coming home. The growing frequency with which he put his phone face down when I entered a room. The sudden work trips that hadn't happened before. I'd explained away each incident individually. The late nights were for the big Peterson project. The gym was a healthy New Year's resolution. The phone was just him being considerate about screen time during our conversations. The trips were because the company was expanding. But collectively, viewed through the harsh light of "I meant it at the time," these explanations felt like the desperate rationalizations they were. "Is there someone else?" I asked, the question I'd been afraid to voice even in my own thoughts. Daniel's eyes widened, genuine surprise crossing his features. "What? No, Kate. There's no one else." I searched his face and found no deception there, just weariness. Somehow that was worse. If he'd been cheating, at least I could blame our problems on an outside force. But this meant the problem was us. Just us. "Then what happened to us?" I whispered. "We used to be so good together." He was quiet for a long moment, twisting his wedding band, a nervous habit he'd had since the day I'd slid it onto his finger. "I don't know," he finally said. "Maybe we got too comfortable. Stop trying." Or maybe we were never as compatible as we thought and the excitement of being in love just masked that for a while. I felt cold despite the restaurant's warmth. Were you planning to tell me any of this before tonight? I've tried, Kate. In my way. He looked genuinely pained now. All those times I suggested we do separate things on weekends. When I brought up how different our priorities are. When I said maybe we should think about what we each want for the future. I remembered those conversations differently, as Daniel being independent or practical or forward-thinking. Not as him trying to create distance. You never actually said you were unhappy, I pointed out. Would you have heard me if I had? He asked softly. The question hit me like a slap. Had I been so invested in the image of our perfect marriage that I'd ignored the reality crumbling beneath the surface? Had I brushed aside his attempts to communicate his dissatisfaction because they didn't fit the narrative I wanted? I thought about the vacation brochures I'd brought home last month, planning our summer trip without really asking what he wanted. The dinner parties I'd organized with my colleagues, assuming he'd enjoy them as much as I did. The holiday traditions from my family that I'd insisted we maintain, despite his lukewarm participation. I didn't realize, I said finally, my voice small. Daniel reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. It was the first time he'd initiated contact all night. I didn't make it easy to realize. I kept hoping things would get better naturally. Our server appeared again, cautiously this time. Are you folks ready to order, or do you need a few more minutes? A few more minutes, please, Daniel said, and the server nodded, retreating once more. I took another sip of wine, trying to compose myself. So what happens now? Are you saying you want to end our marriage? Daniel looked around the restaurant, his expression troubled. I've been thinking about it. But I didn't want to have this conversation here. Not tonight. Then why agree to an anniversary dinner at all? I asked, hurt and confusion bubbling up again. Because He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. Because part of me still hoped coming back here might remind us both of what we had. That maybe we could find our way back. And did it? I asked, barely breathing. Remind you? He met my eyes, and in that moment I knew the answer before he spoke. It reminded me of who we were. But I don't think those people exist anymore, Kate. The restaurant continued bustling around us. Servers carrying steaming plates, couples laughing, families celebrating. But at our table something had just died quietly. The illusion I'd been carefully maintaining for months, perhaps years, had finally shattered. I looked down at my purse where the anniversary card and gift waited. They suddenly seemed naive, pathetic even. Like a child leaving out cookies for Santa long after learning the truth. I should go, I said, reaching for my purse. Kate, don't. Let's at least have dinner. Talk this through properly. I can't sit here pretending everything's fine, I said, my voice catching. Not now. We're supposed to meet my parents for dessert, he said, checking his watch. They're joining us at 8. I stared at him, disbelieving. You invited your parents? Tonight. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. They were in town anyway. Mom suggested it. Of course she had. Daniel's mother had never quite warmed to me, always finding subtle ways to remind me I wasn't what she'd envisioned for her son. That she would insert herself into our anniversary dinner felt like a final indignity. Fine, I said, setting my purse down with a determined thud. I'll stay. Not because I wanted to, but because running away felt like admitting defeat. And because some small, stubborn part of me thought maybe, just maybe, the evening could still be salvaged. That we might find some path forward, even if it wasn't the one I'd imagined. Little did I know that staying would lead to the most humiliating moment of my life. And ultimately, to the most liberating. I dabbed my napkin against the corner of my eye, determined not to smudge my carefully applied mascara. A glance at my watch confirmed it was nearly 8. Daniel's parents would arrive any minute, and I wasn't sure how I'd maintain composure through dessert after the conversation we'd just had. The waiter returned with our entrees. Scallops for Daniel as predictable as sunrise, and salmon for me that I doubted I could stomach now. We ate in uncomfortable silence, the clink of silverware against plates the only sound between us. Daniel, Kate. A familiar, overly cheerful voice broke through the quiet. There you are. I looked up to see Evelyn Cooper approaching our table, her husband Richard following a step behind. I quickly plastered on what I hoped was a convincing smile. Mom, Dad. Daniel stood to greet them, relief evident in his posture. You found us. Of course we did, Evelyn said, embracing her son before turning to me with considerably less enthusiasm. Kate dear, that dress is interesting. I rose to accept her air kiss near my cheek. Thank you for joining us, Evelyn. Richard gave me a warmer greeting, a genuine hug and a whispered, "Happy anniversary, kiddo." Of the two he'd always been kinder, though he rarely contradicted his wife. The server appeared instantly, pulling 2 additional chairs to our table and distributing dessert menus. Evelyn waved hers away. "Just coffee for me," she announced. "Black. Richard will have the same." I caught Richard's slight frown. He preferred tea and always had, but he nodded in agreement. "So," Evelyn began once the server departed, leaning forward conspiratorially, "how has the celebration been so far?" Daniel and I exchanged a glance. "Fine," Daniel answered before I could speak. "Just catching up on everything." "Wonderful," she said, though her eyes narrowed slightly, sensing tension. 6 years. My goodness. Feels longer, doesn't it? The comment hung in the air, its edge unmistakable. I twisted my wedding band, focusing on its smooth metal rather than Evelyn's knowing smirk. "Actually, it's flown by," I replied, determined not to let her see she'd struck a nerve. "Really?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Daniel was just telling us last weekend how— What was it, dear?" She turned to her son. "How stuck you've been feeling." My head snapped up. "Last weekend." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom." "Oh." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth in mock surprise. "Was that supposed to be between us?" "I'm sorry, darling." The pieces clicked into place. "You went to your parents last weekend? You told me you were at a work retreat in Denver." Daniel's jaw tightened. "It wasn't important." "Wasn't it?" I fought to keep my voice level. "You lied about where you were and apparently discussed our marriage problems with your parents before talking to me about them?" Richard cleared his throat. "Maybe we should order dessert after all. The chocolate cake looks excellent." "No, Richard." Evelyn patted her husband's hand but kept her eyes on me. "I think Kate deserves to know. Daniel's been struggling for months now. He just didn't know how to tell you." "Mom, please," Daniel implored, but there was a resignation in his voice that told me this conversation had been planned. The server arrived with coffees, misreading the tension as eager anticipation. "Are we ready for dessert? Perhaps something special for the anniversary couple?" "No dessert," Daniel said abruptly. "Just the check, please." "Actually," Evelyn interjected, "bring us a bottle of champagne. The Veuve Clicquot." The server nodded and retreated, leaving us in uncomfortable silence. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what's happening right now?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I wanted to wait until after dinner in private. This isn't how I planned it." "Planned what?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Evelyn sighed dramatically. "Daniel's leaving you, Kate. Surely you must have suspected something." The restaurant noise faded to a distant hum. I stared at Evelyn, then at Daniel, who looked pained but didn't contradict his mother. "You're leaving me?" My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Daniel finally met my gaze. "I've been trying to find the right time, the right way." "I'm sorry." "The right way?" I repeated incredulously. "By discussing it with your parents first? By lying about where you were? By waiting until our anniversary dinner?" "That part wasn't my idea," Daniel admitted, shooting his mother a look. "I wanted to wait, do this privately. But Mom thought—" "I thought," Evelyn interrupted, "that doing it on your anniversary would provide a clean break. A clear end date. Much neater for the paperwork." Richard winced. "Evelyn, perhaps we should let them." "Paperwork?" I echoed, my confusion mounting. "What paperwork?" The server returned with champagne and 4 flutes, arranging them with flourish before popping the cork. The sound made me flinch. "Will there be anything else?" he asked, filling our glasses. "No thank you," Daniel answered quickly. "Actually yes, the check. Now please." As the server walked away, Daniel took a deep breath. "Kate, this isn't how I wanted to do this." "Then don't," I pleaded. "Let's go home and talk about this. Really talk." "It's too late for that," Evelyn interjected. "Daniel's already spoken with our family attorney. The separation papers are being drawn up as we speak." I felt as if I'd been doused with ice water. You've already contacted a lawyer? Daniel nodded, unable to meet my eyes. Last Tuesday. When you told me you were working late, I realized aloud. Another lie in a growing collection. I'm sorry, he said again, the phrase becoming meaningless with repetition. You all planned this, I said slowly, looking between the three of them. This whole evening. The anniversary dinner, the talk about, maybe we could find our way back. All of it just to what? Publicly humiliate me. Don't be dramatic, Kate, Evelyn said dismissively. Daniel simply wanted to be honest with you, and we're here for support. Support. I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call this? Kate, Daniel reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Let me explain everything properly. Not here. Why not here? I challenged. You've already involved your parents. You've already lied multiple times. What's left to explain in private? Daniel glanced around the restaurant, clearly uncomfortable with the attention our tense conversation was beginning to attract. A few diners at nearby tables were stealing curious glances our way. Because, he lowered his voice, there are things we need to discuss. Practical matters. Like the fact that he's moving out tonight, Evelyn supplied helpfully. Richard already helped him pack the essentials this morning while you were at your hair appointment. I turned to Daniel, stung by this new betrayal. You packed while I was getting ready for our anniversary? He had the decency to look ashamed. Just some clothes and work stuff. I'm staying at the residence inn until I find an apartment. The server reappeared with the check. Daniel quickly handed over his credit card, clearly eager to conclude this disaster of an evening. I can't believe this is happening, I whispered, more to myself than anyone at the table. Well, it is, Evelyn said briskly, reaching for her champagne flute. And I think under the circumstances a toast is in order. Richard looked alarmed. Evelyn, I don't think. To my son, she continued, raising her glass. Who's finally realizing he deserves better than settling. Daniel didn't stop her, didn't defend me. He just looked tired and resigned. Mom, that's enough, he said, but without conviction. Evelyn ignored him, lifting her glass higher. Daniel, darling, your father and I are so proud of you for finding the courage to move on. To freedom, single life, and fresh starts. A few nearby diners, hearing what sounded like a celebratory toast, smiled in our direction. They only knew. I sat frozen, unable to process the cruelty unfolding before me. 6 years of marriage, reduced to something Daniel needed courage to escape from. I got you something too, Daniel said quietly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small package wrapped in plain blue paper. I was going to give this to you later, but... Numbly I accepted the package. It felt light, insubstantial. With shaking fingers, I unwrapped it to find a folded navy t-shirt. Unfolding it, I stared in disbelief at the white block letters across the chest. 6 years wasted. Daniel. Richard exclaimed, genuinely shocked. That's not. It was a joke, Daniel explained hastily, not sounding entirely convinced himself. Tyler from work suggested it. He said humor might lighten the situation. Evelyn's laugh cut through my stunned silence. Oh, that's clever. Dark but clever. Richard looked deeply uncomfortable but said nothing to contradict his wife or son. I held the shirt in my hands, its cotton fabric suddenly feeling as heavy as lead. 6 years of my life, countless memories, shared dreams, the future I'd planned, all dismissed as a waste. And not just dismissed but mocked, turned into a punchline for his parents' amusement. The server returned with Daniel's card and receipt. Was everything to your satisfaction this evening? The question, so routine in its delivery, struck me as absurdly ironic. Daniel signed quickly. Fine, thank you. Wonderful, the server smiled. And happy anniversary once again. As he walked away, Evelyn snickered behind her hand. Well, that's awkward. Daniel checked his watch. I should probably get going. I still need to pick up my laptop from the house. That's it. I finally found my voice. You dropped this bomb, give me this insulting shirt, and now you're just leaving? Kate, he sighed as if I were being unreasonable. We can talk more tomorrow when things are calmer. I'll call you. Don't worry, dear, Evelyn added with false sweetness. The first night is the hardest, but you'll adjust to being alone again. Maybe you can use this as an opportunity to work on yourself. The shirt in my hands, the pitying look from Richard, Evelyn's smug satisfaction, Daniel's cowardly avoidance. It all swirled together in a tornado of humiliation and rage. 6 years thrown away like trash. 6 years deemed a waste. 6 years of loving someone who could treat me this way. I stood up slowly, the shirt clutched in my fist, aware that several diners were now openly watching our table. The champagne glasses stood untouched except for Evelyn's, the bubbles still rising to the surface like my anger was rising through my chest. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, finding my center in the chaos of emotions. I looked at each of their faces. Richard's discomfort, Evelyn's satisfaction, Daniel's resignation, and made a decision. In that moment something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, raw and bleeding, but alongside it grew something else. Clarity. Pure, crystalline clarity about who these people were, who I was, and what I deserved. Actually, I said, my voice stronger than I expected, I have something to say. Actually, I said, my voice stronger than I expected, I have something to say. Time seemed to slow as I stood there, the offensive t-shirt still clutched in my hand. The background chatter of the restaurant faded, and for 10 seconds, though it felt much longer, I was suspended in perfect clarity, taking inventory of my life. My thoughts raced through memories that suddenly appeared in a different light. Daniel criticizing my career choices while I supported his. The vacation I'd canceled because his mother needed him that weekend. The friends I'd gradually lost touch with because Daniel found them too dramatic. The writing workshop I'd abandoned because he said it was too expensive, only to watch him buy a new set of golf clubs the following week. This pattern of sacrifices hadn't been love, it had been erasure. Slowly, subtly, the Kate who existed before Daniel had been disappearing, replaced by a woman who constantly adjusted herself to keep the peace. I looked at Evelyn, whose smug smile was beginning to falter under my steady gaze. I looked at Richard, who couldn't meet my eyes, his discomfort evidence of his complicity through silence. And finally, I looked at Daniel, who had the audacity to appear annoyed, as if my moment of reflection was inconveniencing him. Kate, Daniel said in that patronizing tone I'd now realized he'd been using for years. Let's not make a scene. The irony nearly made me laugh. He was concerned about a scene after orchestrating this entire public humiliation? A scene. I echoed, my voice calm but carrying enough to make nearby diners glance our way. You mean like inviting your parents to witness you ending our marriage on our anniversary? Or presenting me with this charming souvenir? I held up the shirt, letting it unfurl for all to see. Daniel paled slightly. Keep your voice down. Why? I asked, genuine curiosity in my tone. You clearly wanted an audience. Your mother certainly does. I nodded toward Evelyn, whose expression had hardened into something ugly. Now listen here, Evelyn began, but I raised my hand, surprising myself with the authority of the gesture. No, I said firmly. For once, you're going to listen to me. I took a slow, deliberate breath, aware that several tables around us had gone quiet, diners pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. 6 years ago, I began, addressing Daniel directly. I married a man who I thought saw me, really saw me, who valued my dreams as much as his own, who promised to be my partner, not my critic, not my judge. My voice remained steady, drawing strength from someplace I hadn't known existed within me. I've spent years making myself smaller to fit into the spaces you and your family deemed appropriate for me, apologizing for my ambitions, defending my friendships, justifying my existence. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. That's not fair. Isn't it? I met his gaze unflinchingly. When was the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer? When did you last encourage me to pursue something just because it made me happy? When did you stand up for me when your mother made one of her cutting remarks? Evelyn huffed indignantly. I've always treated you fairly, Kate. An unexpected laugh escaped me, not bitter but genuinely amused by the absurdity of her statement. Evelyn, you've criticized everything from my cooking to my career to the way I fold towels. At our wedding, you told 3 different people you hoped Daniel would come to his senses before the honeymoon. Richard cleared his throat. She didn't mean. She did, I interrupted, not unkindly. And you know it, Richard. You've always known it and said nothing. The quiet acknowledgement in his eyes confirmed my words. In a strange way, I felt sympathy for him, Trapped in Evelyn's orbit for decades, his own voice diminished to near silence. "If you're quite finished," Daniel said, standing as if to signal the conversation was over, "I'll call you tomorrow to discuss the logistics." Logistics, I repeated, tasting the coldness of the word. 6 years reduced to logistics. A server approached cautiously. "Is everything all right here?" Before Daniel could speak, I turned to him with a genuine smile. "Actually, we're celebrating. Apparently, my husband has found the courage to pursue his freedom. And you know what? So have I." The server blinked in confusion but managed a professional nod before retreating. I turned back to the table, feeling strangely light, as if weights I hadn't known I was carrying had suddenly dropped away. "Daniel," I said, my voice clear enough that those nearby could hear, "you're right about one thing. We've grown apart. But it wasn't because we settled, or because I wasn't enough. It was because you stopped seeing me as a person with her own dreams and started seeing me as an accessory to your life." Daniel's face flushed. "That's not true." "It is," I continued calmly. "And deep down you know it. You know how many times I've rearranged my life to accommodate yours. You know how many of my ambitions I've set aside to support yours. You know how I've defended you to my friends when they pointed out how dismissive you can be." I glanced at the shirt still clutched in my hand, then deliberately placed it on the table between us. "But here's what you don't know. I don't regret those 6 years. Not because our marriage was perfect, clearly it wasn't, but because I've learned something invaluable." I straightened my shoulders, feeling taller somehow. "I've learned that I can bend without breaking. That I can love someone completely and still survive when that love isn't returned in kind. That I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for." A woman at a nearby table nodded slightly, her eyes meeting mine in silent solidarity. "So no, Daniel, these weren't 6 years wasted. They were 6 years of lessons. Hard, painful lessons about what I will and won't accept in my life moving forward." Evelyn, clearly uncomfortable with my composed response rather than the hysterical scene she'd anticipated, attempted to regain control. "Well, I'm glad you're taking it so well," she said with artificial sweetness. "Perhaps there's hope for you finding someone more suitable next time." I smiled at her, genuinely amused by her transparent attempt to wound me. "Thank you, Evelyn. I'm sure I will. And I hope someday Daniel finds someone he doesn't feel the need to diminish to feel good about himself." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're twisting everything." "Am I?" I asked softly. "Tell me honestly, when was the last time you were proud of me? Not because I did something that reflected well on you, but because you genuinely admired something about me just for me?" His hesitation was answer enough. I reached into my purse and pulled out the carefully wrapped box containing the vintage watch I'd spent months tracking down, the one that resembled his grandfather's. For a moment I considered keeping it, but that felt petty in light of my newfound clarity. "I got you something too," I said, placing it on the table. "It's a watch like your grandfather's, the one you told me about on our 3rd date. I found it at that antique store in Burlington." Daniel stared at the package, momentarily speechless. "Even while planning to humiliate me," I continued quietly, "I was thinking of ways to make you happy. That's the difference between us, I think." I picked up my purse, suddenly eager to leave this restaurant, this moment behind me. "Keep the watch or don't, it doesn't matter now. But I want you to remember something. I loved you fully, honestly, and without reservation. I can leave knowing I gave our marriage everything I had." "Where are you going?" Daniel asked, sounding genuinely confused, as if he'd expected me to follow his script. Fall apart, beg him to reconsider, or at least wait for his permission to end the conversation. "I'm going home," I replied simply. "Our home, which I suppose is now my home. You've already packed after all. But we need to discuss." "Tomorrow," I cut him off firmly. "You can call your lawyer, I'll call mine, and we'll handle this like adults. But tonight belongs to me." I turned to leave, then paused, remembering the anniversary card still in my purse. The one filled with loving words that now felt like artifacts from another life. I pulled it out and placed it on top of the offensive t-shirt. "Happy anniversary, Daniel," I said without bitterness or sarcasm. "I truly hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." As I walked toward the exit, I felt dozens of eyes on me. Some curious, others sympathetic, a few openly admiring. A young woman at the bar caught my gaze and raised her glass slightly in a silent toast. An older gentleman nodded respectfully as I passed. Just before reaching the door, I heard a voice call out, "Ma'am." I turned to see our server hurrying toward me carrying a small box. "The chocolate soufflé," he explained with a conspiratorial smile. "On the house. It's our best dessert and it seemed like you might enjoy it more than." He trailed off, glancing back toward my table where Daniel and his parents sat in uncomfortable silence. The unexpected kindness brought tears to my eyes for the first time that evening. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what it's worth," he added quietly, "that was the classiest exit I've seen in 15 years of serving." I accepted the box, its warmth seeping through to my fingers, a small but meaningful comfort. "One more thing," I said, reaching into my wallet and extracting several bills. "Would you mind bringing a bottle of your best champagne to that young couple in the corner? The ones who look like they're on their first date." He followed my gaze to a nervous-looking pair stealing glances at each other over menus. "Of course," he agreed. "Any message?" I thought for a moment. "Just, to new beginnings. No name." As I finally stepped outside, the cool evening air felt like a baptism. Traffic noises, distant laughter, the faint music from a nearby bar. All of it sounded sharper, clearer, as if I'd been hearing the world through cotton until now. I didn't look back at the restaurant window, didn't check to see if Daniel was watching me leave. For the first time in years, his gaze, or its absence, didn't define me. Instead, I looked up at the night sky, where a few persistent stars shone despite the city lights. I took a deep, cleansing breath, hugged the warm dessert box to my chest and began walking. Not running away. Not escaping. Simply moving forward one step at a time into whatever came next. The walk home took 40 minutes, though I barely noticed the time passing. My neighborhood looked different somehow, the same familiar houses and storefronts, but as if I were seeing them through new eyes. I ate the chocolate soufflé while sitting on a bench in Miller Park, savoring each bite under the gentle glow of street lamps. The simple pleasure of good chocolate reminded me of other joys I'd forgotten. Reading until dawn, spontaneous road trips, dancing in my kitchen. When I finally reached my front porch, I paused before inserting the key. This house had been our beginning. We'd painted the walls together, argued over furniture placement, hosted dinner parties in the small dining room. Now it would be the setting for our ending. Inside, the silence was immediate and heavy. I moved through the rooms, turning on lights, needing to dispel the shadows. In the bedroom, I noticed the gaps in Daniel's closet, the empty spaces on his side of the bathroom counter. He'd been thorough in his packing, leaving no daily reminder of his presence. I changed into comfortable clothes and curled up on the couch, pulling the soft throw blanket around me. Only then, in the quiet safety of my own home, did I allow the tears to come. Not the broken sobs I might have expected, but quiet tears of release, of mourning for the future I'd thought we'd have. My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout my walk home, but I'd ignored it. Now I glanced at the screen. 3 missed calls from Daniel, 2 from my best friend Melissa, and 17 text messages from various friends. Word traveled fast. I checked Melissa's text first. "Call me. Heard something happened at Aldwell's. You okay?" Before I could respond, my phone rang in my hand. Melissa's face lit up my screen. "Hey," I answered, my voice sounding tired even to my own ears. "Kate," she exclaimed. "Thank God. Are you all right? Jenny's cousin works at Aldwell's and said there was some kind of scene with you and Daniel. What happened?" I took a deep breath. Daniel ended our marriage. At our anniversary dinner. With his parents there. He what? Melissa's voice rose with indignation. "Wait, I'm coming over. Don't move. 20 minutes. Mel, it's after 10. You don't have to." 20 minutes, she repeated firmly and hung up. True to her word, she arrived 19 minutes later, armed with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. I hadn't seen much of Melissa over the past year. Daniel had found her too opinionated, and our get-togethers had gradually dwindled, but she burst through my door as if no time had passed. "Start from the beginning," she commanded, pouring generous glasses of wine for us both. I told her everything. The uncomfortable dinner, the arrival of his parents, the cruel t-shirt, and finally my response. "You actually said all that?" she asked when I described my calm confrontation. "In front of the whole restaurant?" I nodded, surprised at the hint of pride I felt. I don't know where it came from. I just couldn't shrink myself anymore. Good, Melissa said fiercely. It's about damn time. She raised her glass. To finding your voice. As we talked late into the night, my phone continued to light up with notifications. Word of what happened at Aldwell's had spread through our social circle with remarkable speed. Some messages were from close friends expressing concern, others from acquaintances fishing for gossip. Daniel called twice more, leaving terse voicemails asking me to be reasonable and discuss next steps. You don't have to talk to him yet, Melissa reassured me. Take the weekend at least. Process this on your own terms. It felt strange but liberating to realize she was right. I didn't have to respond on Daniel's schedule anymore. Around midnight, an unexpected text arrived from a number I didn't recognize. Kate, it's Lisa Cooper. Daniel's sister. Could we talk tomorrow? Just the two of us. I showed Melissa the message. What do you think? Daniel's sister? She frowned. The one who lives in Seattle. Why would she reach out now? I've only met her twice, I explained. She and Daniel aren't close. She didn't even come to our wedding. Family drama with Evelyn. Melissa considered. Could be interesting. Want me to come with you? I thought about it then shook my head. No, I think I should do this alone. After Melissa left, promising to check in the next day, I replied to Lisa, coffee at Baldwin's 10 a.m.? Her response came immediately, I'll be there. Thank you. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying moments from my marriage, seeing red flags I'd ignored. The way Daniel would subtly criticize my outfit if we were meeting his colleagues. How he'd interrupt me when I spoke about my work. The gradual isolation from friends who questioned his behavior. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to close. For one disoriented moment, I reached for Daniel's side of the bed before remembering. The reality of my new situation settled over me. I was alone, my marriage was over, and today was the first day of whatever came next. Baldwin's Coffee was bustling with Saturday morning customers when I arrived. I spotted Lisa immediately, sitting by the window, looking remarkably unlike her brother or mother with her bright blue hair and casual clothes. Kate, she stood to greet me, her expression tentative. Thank you for meeting me. Of course, I replied, unsure what else to say. We ordered coffee and found ourselves in an awkward silence until Lisa finally spoke. I heard what happened, she began. My mother called me last night furious. Her version was creative. I can imagine, I said dryly. Lisa's mouth quirked in a half-smile. According to her, you had some kind of public breakdown and embarrassed the entire family. Is that why you wanted to meet? I asked carefully. To get the true story? She shook her head. I know my brother and mother well enough to read between the lines. I wanted to meet because... She hesitated, then continued more firmly. Because I think you deserve to know some things about our family. Things that might help you understand what happened. For the next hour, Lisa shared insights into the Cooper family dynamics that explained so much. Evelyn's controlling nature and how she'd always pitted Daniel against his sister. The family's obsession with appearances and success. The pattern of emotional manipulation that had shaped Daniel since childhood. He was the golden child, Lisa explained, stirring her coffee absently. Mom molded him to be the perfect son, and he's never known how to be anything else. When I broke away, moved across the country, cut contact for years, it only made him more determined to be what she wanted. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Lisa met my eyes directly. Because I want you to know it wasn't you. What Daniel did, how he treated you, that's on him and the twisted values our mother instilled. You got caught in a cycle that started long before you met him. Her words offered a strange comfort, not erasing the pain but providing context that helped me see my marriage through a different lens. Also, Lisa continued, her voice softer, because I admire what you did. Standing up to them like that. I wish I'd seen it. It took me years of therapy to find that kind of clarity. As we parted, Lisa surprised me with a hug. Take care of yourself, Kate. And if you ever want to talk, well, I'm not exactly family anymore, but I'm a good listener. The days that followed brought more ripples from my public stand at Aldwell's. On Monday, I returned to my job at the community college's administrative office to find I'd become something of a legend. Apparently, one of my colleagues had been dining at a nearby table that night. You were magnificent, Charlotte gushed when she caught me in the break room. The way you handled yourself, so dignified but strong. I wish I'd had your courage when my ex left. I mumbled my thanks, uncomfortable with the attention but secretly heartened by her support. By Wednesday, I'd finally answered Daniel's increasingly frustrated calls and agreed to meet with him and the lawyers the following week. I need a few more days, I told him firmly. And I'm bringing my own attorney. Your own, he'd sputtered. Kate, that's not necessary. My lawyer can handle everything fairly. Your lawyer works for you, not me, I replied, surprised by my own assertiveness. I've already scheduled a consultation. That small act, choosing my own legal representation rather than accepting whatever terms Daniel offered, felt symbolically important. I was making decisions for myself, considering my own interests first. Perhaps the most unexpected ripple came Friday evening when I found myself sitting across from Dean Wilson, the head of the English department, discussing the adjunct teaching position I'd abandoned pursuing 2 years earlier when Daniel had discouraged me. Your application and writing samples were impressive, Dean Wilson said, reviewing my old file. We were disappointed when you withdrew. My circumstances have changed, I explained simply. I'd like to be reconsidered if possible. She studied me thoughtfully. The fall semester is full, but we have a creative writing section opening in spring. Would that interest you? It would mean months of preparation, updating my portfolio, balancing this with my administrative job. Exactly the kind of challenge Daniel had insisted would be too stressful for me. I felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Yes, I said confidently. That would interest me very much. As I drove home from that meeting, I realized how thoroughly my life had been transformed in just 1 week. The humiliation that Daniel and his parents had intended as my ending had somehow become my beginning instead. The pain was still there. I wasn't naive enough to think 6 years could be erased in days. But alongside it grew something I hadn't expected: possibility. That night, I moved our wedding album from the living room bookshelf to a box in the spare room. Not throwing it away, I wasn't ready for that finality, but acknowledging it belonged to my past, not my present. In its place, I set a small potted succulent Melissa had brought me, its tiny green leaves reaching upward toward the light. The metaphor wasn't lost on me as I watered it carefully. Resilient growth from arid circumstances. Life finding a way forward. Over the next few weeks, I discovered strengths within myself that 6 years of marriage had buried. Simple decisions became exercises in rediscovery. Repainting the living room the rich terracotta color Daniel had vetoed. Rearranging furniture to suit my preferences rather than his. Cooking spicy Thai dishes he'd always complained were too exotic. The meeting with lawyers had been tense but surprisingly straightforward. Daniel seemed thrown off balance by my calm preparedness, as if he'd expected the tearful, compliant woman he'd grown accustomed to. When his attorney suggested I keep only my personal belongings while Daniel retained the house, my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Elaine whom Melissa had recommended, laid out documentation of my contributions to our home and finances. Kate was the primary contributor to the down payment, Elaine pointed out, sliding a bank statement across the table. And has paid half the mortgage despite earning significantly less. She's entitled to either keep the house or receive fair compensation. Daniel's face had registered genuine surprise. He'd never paid attention to our financial arrangements, leaving bill payment and budgeting to me while assuming his higher salary meant greater contribution. I didn't realize, he'd mumbled, shooting a confused glance at his mother who sat rigidly beside him. There's a lot you didn't realize, Daniel, I'd replied without malice. In the end, we reached an agreement. I would keep the house and buy out his portion over time. It was a stretch financially, especially with my modest administrative salary, but the adjunct teaching position would provide additional income come spring. Besides, the thought of leaving the home I'd poured so much of myself into felt like another concession I wasn't willing to make. You're really staying in that house? Daniel had asked as we left the attorney's office. His mother had stormed ahead to the parking lot, fuming about the settlement. It's my home, I answered simply. Why would I leave? He'd shaken his head as if I were being unreasonable. I just thought you'd want a fresh start somewhere new. I am making a fresh start, I told him. Just not on your terms. The divorce proceedings moved along with surprising efficiency. Each paper I signed felt less like an ending and more like clearing space for what might come next. There were difficult moments, of course. sorting through wedding photos, dividing holiday decorations we'd collected together, responding to well-meaning but awkward questions from acquaintances who hadn't heard about our separation. "How's Daniel doing? We haven't seen you two in ages," our former neighbor Mrs. Winters had asked when I ran into her at the grocery store. "We're divorced," I'd replied, the words feeling strange but not painful on my tongue. "But I'm doing well, thank you." Her startled expression had given way to sympathy. "Oh honey, I'm so sorry. These things are just devastating." I'd considered her words, then smiled genuinely. "Actually, it was necessary. Sometimes an ending is the beginning you need." One Saturday morning in early October, about 3 months after that fateful anniversary dinner, I was clearing out the spare room, which had functioned as storage for Daniel's sports equipment and my long-ignored art supplies, when I uncovered my old easel. I ran my fingers over the wood, remembering how painting had once been my refuge, my joy. Daniel had never actively discouraged my art, but his subtle reactions, checking his watch during gallery visits, questioning the practicality of art classes, had gradually pushed me to set it aside. On impulse, I set up the easel by the living room window, where northern light spilled across the hardwood floors. My supplies were dusty but usable: tubes of acrylic paint, brushes in various states of neglect, canvases I'd purchased with such hope years ago. I painted all day, losing myself in color and texture. The result wasn't particularly good, my skills rusty from disuse, but the act itself felt like reclaiming a forgotten piece of myself. I painted a simple scene, a door standing open to a landscape of possibilities. Not subtle symbolism, perhaps, but deeply satisfying. As autumn deepened, I established new routines. Sunday brunches with Melissa and other friends who had drifted back into my life. Tuesday evening creative writing workshops at the local library to prepare for my teaching position. Weekend hikes in the state park, something I'd always wanted to do but had abandoned because Daniel preferred watching sports. I'd expected loneliness to be my constant companion, but instead found solitude often felt like freedom. The empty space beside me in bed gradually stopped feeling like an absence and began feeling like room to stretch. I spread out my limbs, no longer curling myself into a compact shape on my side. Lisa Cooper and I maintained an unexpected friendship, meeting for coffee every few weeks. Through her, I gained insight into the family dynamics that had shaped Daniel without the burden of trying to fix him. "Mom's been on a rampage since the settlement," she told me during one of our meetings. "She wanted Daniel to fight for the house out of spite." "How's he doing?" I asked, surprised to realize I genuinely wanted to know. Lisa shrugged. "Working too much. Dating someone from his office. Mom's choice, naturally. He seems the same, just in a different setting." I felt a pang of sadness, not for what I'd lost, but for what Daniel might never find if he remained under his mother's influence. "I hope he figures it out someday," I said sincerely. Lisa studied me over her coffee cup. "You know what amazes me? You never seem bitter. After what they did to you, I'd be plotting revenge." I considered this. Being bitter would mean they still have power over me. I'm too busy rediscovering who I am to waste energy on resentment. The week before Thanksgiving brought an unexpected encounter. I was leaving the community college when I noticed someone sitting on a bench near my car. Daniel, looking uncharacteristically casual in jeans and a sweater. "Kate," he stood as I approached. "I hope this is okay. I didn't want to surprise you at home." "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately concerned something had happened to his father or sister. "Nothing," he assured me. I wanted to return this." He held out a small package. I unwrapped it cautiously to find the vintage watch I'd given him that night at Aldwell's. "I can't keep it," he explained, looking uncomfortable. "It doesn't feel right." I weighed the watch in my palm, remembering the months I'd spent tracking it down, the excitement I'd felt imagining his reaction. Now it seemed like an artifact from someone else's life. "Keep it," I said, offering it back. "Or sell it. I bought it for you." He shook his head. "I don't deserve it, Kate. Not after what I did." The admission surprised me. In all our interactions since that night, he'd never acknowledged the cruelty of his actions. "No," I agreed quietly. "You don't deserve it. But that doesn't change the fact that it was a gift." He hesitated, then slowly took the watch back. "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence until he spoke again. "You look good." "Happy." "I am." I replied, realizing the truth of it. I'm teaching next semester. A flicker of genuine smile crossed his face. The creative writing course? The one I said would be too much work. I nodded, surprised he remembered. You'll be great at it, he said, and for once, there was no condescension in his tone. You always had a way with words. As he turned to leave, he paused. That night at the restaurant, what you said, it was true, wasn't it? About me not seeing you. Yes, I answered honestly. For a long time. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. A lot, actually. That's a start, I said, not unkindly. I watched him walk away, feeling neither regret nor longing, just a quiet acknowledgement that some chapters truly end, making space for new stories to begin. The holidays approached, bringing invitations and options I'd never had to consider as part of a couple. Melissa wanted me to join her family's chaotic Christmas celebration. Charlotte from work invited me to a New Year's party. Lisa suggested I escape the season entirely with a spa weekend out of town. For the first time, I could choose based solely on what appealed to me. No negotiations, no compromise, no managing another person's expectations or family obligations. The freedom was dizzying. I decided to host a small gathering in my home for winter solstice. Not Christmas or New Year's, but a celebration of light returning after darkness. I invited the people who had supported me through these months of transition. Melissa, Charlotte, my new writing group friends, Lisa, and even Dean Wilson, who had become a mentor as I prepared for teaching. The evening of the solstice, my home glowed with candles and conversation. Looking around at these people who knew the real me, not just the accommodating wife I'd become, I felt a profound sense of rightness. A toast, Melissa proclaimed, raising her glass. To Kate, who showed us all what courage looks like. As glasses clinked and warm words flowed around me, I thought about that night 6 months ago, when Daniel had raised his glass and declared, "To freedom, single life, and fresh starts." His words had been meant to wound, to end something. Instead, they had become my unexpected beginning. Later, after my guests had departed and I sat alone in my living room, I picked up the journal I'd been keeping since the divorce. On a fresh page I wrote, 6 months ago I thought my world was ending. Now I understand it was just making space for something truer. The breaking wasn't the end, it was the start of finding myself in the pieces. Some lessons arrive in cruel packages. Some gifts come disguised as losses. But today, sitting in this home that is fully mine, surrounded by possibilities I've created, I can finally say with certainty, nothing was wasted. Every moment led me here, to this version of myself I might never have discovered otherwise. To freedom indeed. To fresh starts. To the person I'm becoming, one choice at a time. I closed the journal and looked out at the winter night, the longest darkness of the year already beginning its imperceptible shift toward light. Tomorrow would bring a few more seconds of sunshine. And the day after a few more. It was enough. It was everything.